So in 1900, this book comes out that would literally change how we talk about our own minds forever. It was Sigmund Freud's magnum opus, The Interpretation of Dreams. Let's get into it.
I mean, this single book introduced the world to concepts like the unconscious mind, repression, the idea that our inner lives are this chaotic, hidden drama playing out beneath the surface. It was a true epoch-making book. But, before it could change the world, it actually had to sell. And it really, really didn't.
351. Seriously, that's how many copies The Interpretation of Dreams sold in its first 6 years. It was an absolute, complete commercial disaster. Which, of course, brings us to the big question for this whole explainer. How did a book that was so profoundly ignored, just a total flop, go on to become one of the most influential texts of the entire 20th century?
The launch wasn't just quiet. It was met with this wall of academic silence. The scientific community at the time, they weren't just unimpressed. They were completely and utterly bewildered. And you can tell Freud himself really felt that rejection. Years later, in the preface to the second edition, he wrote with a little bit of bitterness that his colleagues had basically just ignored him. See, to them, dreams were just meaningless brain noise, a kind of psychical anarchy. But Freud? He was about to argue the exact opposite. Okay, so at the very heart of Freud's radical new theory was this one simple but incredibly powerful idea. Every single dream we have is meaningful. And that whole idea is built on a concept called wish fulfillment. Freud's big claim was that every dream, it doesn't matter how weird or even how upsetting it seems on the surface, is secretly the fulfillment of a wish, usually a desire that we've pushed down out of our conscious mind. He even used this old proverb to make his point. What do geese dream of? Of maize. It's the most basic, undisguised wish you can imagine, right? A hungry person dreams of food, a thirsty person dreams of water. But for complicated people like us, our deepest wishes are rarely that simple.
And this is the immediate, most obvious question, isn't it? If dreams are just us getting what we want, then why do we have so many anxiety dreams? Why do we dream about failing a test, or being chased, or, you know the one, showing up totally naked in public? Well, Freud had an answer for that, and this is where things get really, really interesting.
Freud argued that our most powerful wishes, especially the ones about aggression and sexuality, are totally forbidden by our conscious, civilized minds. So to sneak past our own internal censor, these wishes have to be disguised. And he called this process of disguise the dream work.
You can think of the dream work as this kind of bizarre translation engine. It takes the real, hidden meaning of the dream, what Freud called the latent content, and it scrambles it all up into the weird story we remember when we wake up. That's the manifest content. It's basically an act of self-censorship to protect us from our own thoughts. So how does it work? Well, it operates through a few key tricks. First, there's condensation, which smashes a bunch of ideas into one single image. So a dream figure might look like your boss, but act like your father and have your friend's name. Then there's displacement, which shifts all the emotional weight around. A huge, terrifying fear might show up as a tiny, insignificant little object in your dream. And finally, there's representation, which is all about turning abstract ideas into concrete pictures. And this is where Freud went from being just controversial to being infamous. He argued that this dream work uses a kind of universal dictionary of symbols, and a surprising number of them have to do with sex. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a dream about walking up a staircase? Well, according to Freud, that dream is probably not just about a staircase. This table kind of lays out his logic. In the Freudian symbol dictionary, any long, penetrating object, or things that only men wear, like hats and neckties, they often symbolize the male genitals. Enclosed spaces that can hold things, like a room or a box, that symbolizes a woman or female genitals. And as for actions, well, let's just say a lot of them symbolize other actions. And just in case you think this is some kind of exaggeration, this is Freud in his own words. He's talking about the rhythmic movement, getting out of breath. He saw a direct symbolic link between climbing stairs and the sexual act. It's this kind of analysis that made his work both totally shocking and eventually impossible to ignore.
Now, Freud's deep dive into the dreams that many of us have, what he called typical dreams, led him to his most explosive, most culture-shaking theory of all. And believe it or not, it wasn't born from clinical data, but from a 2,500-year-old play. This theory would come to define psychoanalysis for a century.
You have to understand, before Freud, nightmares were seen as external things, demons or evil spirits attacking us in our sleep. Freud's really radical move was to say, no, the monster is inside us. He argued that it comes from the primal, repressed urges of our own unconscious. This is a fundamental shift. It means our demons aren't something to be cast out, but something to be understood.
And he found his proof text in Sophocles' tragedy, Oedipus Rex. He absolutely seized on this line, where Queen Jocasta is telling Oedipus not to worry about a prophecy that he'd sleep with his mother. She says, hey, lots of guys have that dream, don't worry about it. For Freud, this wasn't her dismissing it. It was an admission. It was evidence that these dark thoughts were ancient and they were universal. For Freud, this was the key. He argued that the entire Oedipus myth is just a big, cultural story built around two universal, repressed wishes that bubble up in our dreams, killing the father and sleeping with the mother. So in a way, our greatest myths are just our most common nightmares written large. And this Oedipus complex became a cornerstone of his entire psychological framework. So let's pull back for a second and look at the big picture. What Freud was doing was basically waging a one-man war against the entire scientific consensus of his time. The science of the day said dreams were just random brain firings, totally meaningless echoes of what happened during the day. Freud's theory was a direct assault on that. He insisted, no, dreams are not chaos. They are a coded message. And this wasn't just some academic debate. This idea was the key that unlocked a whole new kind of therapy. By decoding these messages, what he called the royal road to the unconscious, a therapist could actually map the hidden conflicts driving a person's life. And despite that disastrous launch, despite the years of being ridiculed, Freud always knew how important this book was. He considered it his single greatest discovery. He knew, even when nobody else did, that he had stumbled onto something that would change everything. So this all leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. Look, modern science may disagree with a lot of Freud's specific interpretations, but his central challenge to us is still there. What if the strangest, most nonsensical parts of our minds are not glitches, but a secret language? What if that ridiculous dream you had last night was actually your unconscious, finally getting a chance to speak its truth?